We're just so pleased to have you join us for our event today with Canadian athlete, philanthropist, and activist for people with disabilities and founder of the Rick Hasen Foundation, Rick Hasen. I'm the co-lead of the Social Venture Stream and Entrepreneurship at UBC, as well as a Climate Venture Studio. So first and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge that UBC's Vancouver Point Grey campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And I'd also like to acknowledge that each of us are coming together today from many different places, near and far. And I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners and the caretakers of the lands in which you're all in. Now, on December 5th in 2019, UBC formally declared a climate emergency, and that joined over 1,700 different jurisdictions around the world with that formal recognition of the gravity of the climate crisis that we're in. This was also a formal recognition of our responsibility, both individually and collectively, to really search for climate solutions and to take meaningful climate action. So entrepreneurship at UBC has had a successful track record of supporting entrepreneurial thinking and helping entrepreneurs to build game-changing companies. So when we reflected on the climate emergency and we really considered what was it that we could actually do, considering the platform that we've built and the network of different business mentors that we had, we thought about what kind of meaningful action can we actually take. So what we decided to do was to create what we're calling the Climate Venture Studio, and that was launched in September of last year. And our mission is to help build breakthrough climate ventures with a real understanding of what the urgent needs are in society and in the market, and to address those with science and engineering-based ventures. Now, along with our social venture stream, the Climate Venture Studio helps UBC researchers and scientists and founders working on scientific and technological innovations that address either the climate emergency and pressing social challenges. So our teams work hands-on with the different ventures to identify these climate-driven or social-based market opportunities, and then to nurture these most high potential solutions that are emerging from the UBC research and innovation, and then help the entrepreneurs to build really high impact ventures. So today's event is really a perfect bridge between these two streams, that is the social stream and the climate stream, when we're thinking about various questions. And today what we're going to be thinking about is how can people who care about the planet best intersect with those who care about an inclusive society? And how can we champion diversity of thought within venture connection? So I'm thrilled to be joined by Rick Hasen, who has his own history of impact at UBC and around the world. And we're privileged to learn more about his work and his story and the work that he's done as an innovator and being able to change our culture and society. So as part of the Social Venture and the Climate Venture Studio series, we'll be talking about the vital importance of championing various perspectives in innovation and looking for that intersection of education and research as an opportunity for change. Now, before this, I'd like to run through our agenda for today and go through some housekeeping items. So first, we're going to set the stage by breaking out into different breakout rooms for 15 minutes to discuss the role that social good plays with environmental welfare. So we're hoping to generate discussion around this topic broadly, as well as have each of the groups gather questions that you can then share with the main group during the question and answer period, and you'll be able to pop those into the chat. Then afterwards, we'll bring everyone back into the big discussion for our main event, which is our fireside chat with Rick Hasen. And then we'll drive straight into the question and answers with the audience afterwards, where you can ask your initial question that you generated from your breakout room, as well as anything else that's come up through the discussion. Then at the very end of the session, We'll zoom you back into the same breakout rooms to digest the discussion and share insight and learnings in these smaller groups. And you'll have about 15 minutes to do that. And then we'll bring everyone back together at the end to conclude the session. And we've got some surprise announcements. Now, on to our housekeeping items. And I'd like to introduce my dear colleague, Michelle Sklar. She's also an executive in residence and head of brand marketing and entrepreneurship at UBC. And she's going to share some more information on today's session. Go ahead, Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. What a lovely introduction. Just super excited for today's event. So just a couple of housekeeping recommendations you can see on the slide here, but I'll just run through a few of these things just to help kind of make the experience even that much better. So first of all, if you'd like to rename yourself on Zoom, you can cite your name and your affiliation, and that way everyone kind of knows who's who, if you will, especially when it comes to the Q&A. If you use the speaker view, you can see our presenters by clicking the speaker view button on the top right corner of your Zoom screen. And of course, we want you to engage the chat function and reactions. We love to see the commentary as we move through the events and really encourage you to pop in questions and comments. The other thing you may have noticed, because I saw that Chang noticed that, we've actually enabled our live transcript for you to view during the event as it happens. So to use this function, press the closed caption button on your navigation bar below the video. Click View Transcript option to view a live transcript where the chat window appears. And if you have any issues with any of this, feel free to just ping one of us on the chat here, and we are happy to help you out. And of course, you can see everything here on the housekeeping document slide, and Allison's also going to share a link if she hasn't done so already. All right, so now that we've got through that, if everyone is still with us, today's session, of course, is designed to be highly interactive through our breakout room discussions and Q&A. So to get engagement going and to get our community flowing here, we are going to generate some breakout rooms for you to connect with some other participants that have joined us in today's session. So asking you, and you can see on the slide here, just to maybe entertain these three questions here. So we'd love to know what brought you to today's event, how we can connect with social good and environmental welfare, and how entrepreneurs can bridge this gap, if any. So these questions are just intended to get the conversation going. So before we get to the fireside chat, we just want to sort of get the energy going and ask that within each one of these groups, if one of you can volunteer to be the, I guess, moderator or host, if you will, just to capture some of these questions so that we can seed them into the chat once we're actually back into the overall discussion as well. So we'll prompt you to do that when we return back from the breakout session. So these will be about 15 minutes. So enjoy the discussion, enjoy getting to know one another. You can see the questions here, and we've also popped them into the chat. So if we're all set, I'm going to ask my colleague Shirley to randomly assign you to breakout rooms, to smaller groups, and we'll see you back here in 15 minutes.
I hope you enjoyed your discussion and you had a chance to meet some new people. And if the note taker for each group would like to post a few of your questions, you can put those in the chat now. My colleague Michelle is going to be compiling those. And then when we come back after the fireside chat with Rick, we'll be doing our question and answer session, and you'll have a chance to pose your questions then. So now I'm so pleased to introduce our guest of honor today, Rick Hasen. And Rick Hasen is the founder of the Rick Hasen Foundation and a Canadian icon who's dedicated his life to awakening the world to the potential of people with disabilities. So he's best known as the man in motion for undertaking an epic 26-month, 40,000 kilometer journey around the world in his wheelchair. He's also a 3-time world champion, a 9-time Pan American gold medalist, and 6-time Paralympian medalist. He's the founder of the Rick Hasen Foundation, and that organization is committed to creating an inclusive world where people with disabilities are living to their full potential. Now, for over 3 decades, Rick and his team have been focused on the removal of barriers. And currently, Rick and the Foundation are rethinking how people of all ages and abilities access spaces where we live, work, and learn and play. As a result of his life experience and conservation of sturgeon and salmon ecosystems, they've been a strong priority for Rick throughout his life. So for over 20 years, Rick has been an advocate of environmental stewardship. He's been working closely with government, fisheries scientists, enforcement personnel, researchers, academics, as well as the commercial sports and Aboriginal fishermen to ensure that these species have a healthy future. So we thought of no better guest than Rick to join us for our first crossover event between our social venture stream and our climate venture studio event. So please give a virtual round of applause to Rick Hasen.
Hey, Shannon. How
Hello.
are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I
Thanks
have
so much.
my 9-year-old is just popping in to ask a question. Sweetheart, what is it? What is it you need? Yes, go aheid.
Yay!
Okay.
Also, Mom, I don't know what it is.
Thank you. Okay, can you close the door?
That's the perfect
Sorry
time.
about that, everybody. It's the nature of the pandemic. We had a COVID outbreak at our school, so my little one's home for a couple of days. So what I thought we'd do for beginning, Rick, is first of all, I wanted to welcome you virtually back to the UBC campus, your UBC community.
Yeah,
And I
thanks.
thought we'd start off by having you talk a little bit about what kind of role UBC has played in your career.
What a huge impact on my journey. You know, as a young student aspiring after my injury to perhaps get into university and be a physical education teacher, you know, I actually applied and eventually was accepted thanks to the great champions inside the School of Physical Education, now Human Kinetics. And there was in particular one amazing champion who became a lifelong friend, and that was Bob Highmarsh. And Bob was on the faculty that basically addressed my application. You can imagine the challenges back then, and those challenges were, someone in a wheelchair being a phys ed teacher, or even getting into access at UBC was a real challenge. So they had to do a lot of thinking, and they broke a precedent. They accepted me, and ironically, just this weekend we had the sad news that my good friend and mentor Bob Highmarsh actually passed away. And you know, it just a real sad loss for the UBC community. He was the head of UBC athletics and just had such a powerful influence on so many people's lives and on the culture of UBC. I want to pass on my condolences to the UBC family and to his family, of course, and he'll be deeply missed. One of the most positive people I've ever met in my life. Yeah, so you know, the reality is as well is that UBC was part of that whole transformation. As you come in as a new student, you're always thinking about new experiences. And for me, it wasn't just the learning material that you get in your classroom. It's actually the connections with students. And you know, as I'd be wheeling along, I do a lot of training in Paralympic sport. I ran into students, and a number of the students were, from engineering. And so these guys were talking to me about my activity, my chair, and next thing you know, I ended up running into students who adopted me as part of their graduating class, and they developed a really integrated system between, they said, that's really hard, you're not sitting in that chair very well, so maybe we could develop a special molded seat. And so they mixed some chemicals, and I sat in this bucket. It got super hot, and it formed around me, and then they tried to sort of chip me out of it, and then they put a little sort of cushion lining there, and then they built this chromium alloy special frame, and it was lighter and stronger. And then the biomechanics folks, figured out how to cross my legs. And next thing you know, I was like, gaining over 10% in output and performance, and ended up winning a gold medal at the Paralympic Games. And what an amazing way to demonstrate how when people meet each other, and and you're synergizing, and all of a sudden, magic happens, and innovation and something state of the art helps you break through into a completely different threshold.
Yeah, that's really amazing. There's two major themes that came to mind while you were describing this. So within the entrepreneurship community, one thing we often focus on, or have our researchers and our individuals focus on, is figuring out what the pain is for the person that you're going to provide a solution for. And often, if your worldview is being quite sheltered or quite small, it's difficult to find what that pain might be. So when you have these opportunities to have an intersection, as you say, of people from different fields where they recognize that there's one person has this particular problem, but my goodness, your own skill set could actually solve that problem, and you can create these wonderful things that come out of it.
Yeah, there's no question. And of course, then as I started to get ready for the end of my academic engagement and started to lock into this Man in Motion World Tour, taking my athletic skills in marathoning and move into the ultra marathon, we had to start thinking about things differently. How would you actually wheel across Canada in the middle of winter? And it'd be minus 50, and so we actually reached out and connected innovators, designers to develop a special, clothing for, things that would be tested. This is an SFU at Simon Fraser University in a cold room, and they were testing a new body bag, and they could only test it to minus 30. But then, a whole group of engineers would come along, and then they decided, well, it would actually put skin sensors from the mid-thigh all the way to the tip of my toe, and you get a real line temperature readout, and that readout would actually take it, so that if you ever got past, in minus 50, where you have new frontiers of testing, and you could actually, take a break before you got frostbite, and actually a difference between taking risks and being reckless. And that whole piece came together, and then it was like, well, how do you actually keep moving and not get stuck in the ditch, in the ice, in the snow, in a wheelchair? Well, then some mechanical engineers, and fabricators came together and built a special 4-wheel drive wheelchair. This chair was, heavier, harder to push, but it had a sprocket on the inside of the rear wheel and a chain that connected the rear wheel to the front wheel. All 4 wheels drive, wider wheels, but full traction. And, winter gave it almost everything it could at us, minus 50, lots of snow. But thanks to innovation in transferring, those pain thresholds, what was thought to be impossible, people were trying to encourage me to reroute my journey to perhaps go to South America until spring break happened. But instead, we were able to just keep going on the end of our journey from, right through the lakehead, across the prairies, and home into Vancouver, thanks to an amazing group of people who put their brilliance together by solving problems and then applying it.
Yeah, no, that's really, really amazing. It's so exciting to see all of the new innovations that came out of you having the Man in Motion tour, and sort of just thinking about that period of time. So that was like 1985 to 1987. So for me, it was a really because I was in Vancouver then. I was in high school. So you helped to bring the world to Vancouver. We had Expo 86 happening at that point. We had just come off a few years before, of course, Terry Fox had his run across the country. So during a time for me that was really important in my own, self-development and awareness of the world, a lot of the work that you were involved with was helping to make these kind of activities seem normal. So people participating in the Paralympics, what you managed to do in the Man in Motion tour. And then I was there in BC Place when you came in for the big celebration that happened on the last day after, and I now live very close to Thermal Drive, where you had to do that terrible, terrible, very, very steep ascent to come back to Vancouver to your homeland. So it's really incredible what you managed to bring, not just for British Columbia and for Canada, but the visibility that you brought. And I think it's really shining a spotlight on the lifetime opportunities that individuals that had challenges and physical disabilities in their life, that they could have a full life and they could have a full career. And you brought that vision to people such that it became, second nature. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about those experiences that you had going around the world and what you saw about how things have changed.
Yeah, there's no question that was quite an experience and an adventure for sure. Big challenges, but one thing I've learned for sure is just how people viewed people from Canada with a tremendous amount of respect. I think Canada had an amazing reputation around the world, and that gave me a real sense of, in many ways, responsibility to keep playing a role in helping build the Canada we want, not taking it for granted, not sort of making it an idealistic perspective, but to say, we're actually doing quite well. We can do better. And also I learned a lot as I went around the world. I learned that human rights were, still a big challenge, and this wasn't just a charitable endeavor. This is about the idea of standing for human rights, that everybody belonged, and that an accessible and inclusive society is not just a Canadian ideal. It's something that's considered and aspired to all around the world as a human aspiration, and that people have a yearning to come together. No matter where I went, there was a sense of curiousness, of openness, especially the younger that you got in terms of the people that you talked to. Young people were open and totally curious, and really didn't see a disability until they were taught that something was wrong, or to be feared or to be concerned about, and that our stories seem to transcend any political, economic or cultural or geographic region. So that was really inspiring, and ultimately, even though how large and disconnected the world was, it brought me with that sense of aspiration that coming back at the end of the tour, that much more had to be done, much more, and could be.
So as I want to build on some of those concepts. So when you mentioned human rights and accessibility, the first thing that comes to mind to me is around this concept of diversity. And of course, when you think about diversity, it touches on so many different aspects of people's identity, whether it's whether you're having physical disabilities or other challenges, whether you're coming from different ethnic groups, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and the challenges that each of us face in our lifetime, and it changes the perspective and how you view the world. And one of the challenges that we have with innovation and technology is that only certain people have the privilege to pursue their entrepreneurial dreams, for example. One of my colleagues at SFU, Sarah Lubick, likes to use that phrase. And so we have this opportunity that if there has been historically only a subsection of the population that's been able to pursue this, we have all this richness within the rest of the community. If we can only empower and engage that, we can look at the world in a different way. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about having the experience that you have in representing the community of people dealing with accessibility issues. Just talk about how being able to view the world in a different way is actually a superpower. It allows you to identify problems that other people can't see. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, they talk about Canada as having a strength of being a diverse country, and diversity is powerful. To your point earlier, but in order to unleash that, we need to build bridges to inclusivity, and bridges to inclusivity are critical. And how do we relate to each other? What are the common areas of interest, our core principles, values, interests, areas like, and even if you look at disability, people don't realize that 1.3 billion people live on the planet today with a disability, a visual, hearing, mobility, cognitive, mental health challenge. And so when you think about that, it's a massive percentage of the population, the world's largest minority, and it doesn't discriminate between, gender, between, culture, social economic barriers. And it's a great leveler, brings people together. If you care about an accessible and inclusive society, you think people who happen to have disabilities have ability and the ability to contribute, then you automatically have a common place of orientation and focus. One of the challenges for bringing people with disabilities up to the forefront is that that fragmentation also tends to dissipate people's awareness that it is such a powerful force. One, an issue to be addressed, and secondly, an opportunity to contribute, to bring new perspective. It's not just participation. And that contribution comes in the co-creation. Everyone has talent, and if you have a disability, you're a super navigator. You're a self-advocate. You're resilient, and you're working upstream against so many barriers and obstacles. You're often the CEO of your destiny, and you're mobilizing an exceptional team of people to be able to help you. But you're also navigating through upstream barriers, systemically, culturally, economically, and so I think that perspective, especially in a COVID era, has never been more valuable, as people's lives have been disrupted, and all of a sudden we're going, what happened? well, welcome to the world of disability. It's it's a massive challenge, and that sense of optimism and resiliency can truly infuse, I think, Canadian culture, and and actually have a huge leadership role and value. But it also exposes potential weak spots in our value system, because in emergencies, do we leave people with disabilities behind because we don't have that visibility?
That's right. That's right. And I thought you just beautifully articulated all of the various skills that someone has that has to navigate the world in a different way, where the world is not built for them. And I think that there's a real, the problem is there's a real underappreciation that those skills are actually built by having those experiences. And so I think
Yeah,
it's really great to
yeah, true. And whether, as my little example would be at UBC, in bringing innovation to help me. But a lot of the great innovations today in the world that have helped everybody come from people trying to solve people with disabilities solve problems. Like, the captioning that we're dealing with right now, started off with, it was basically there to help people with disabilities communicate, and they couldn't access computers or get onto writing or translation, and so now it's normal. I come into the room and my daughters are actually, they've got captioning on the local TV watching whatever their show is. They love both options, and it's helping everybody, and that's super. The door handles, moving from round knobs that you have to grasp to levers because it's simple and easy. Ramps and curb cuts, not just for people in wheelchairs, but for plant workers who are carrying heavy things, up and down on wheels, or mums and dads with kids in strollers. It's good for everybody, and that innovation can really power up great ideas and opportunities.
Yeah, yeah, I think those are some really, really powerful examples where instead of designing for the average person, right at the mean, you've actually taken into consideration what the needs are of groups that are marginalized, and then you realize that it has such a benefit for the rest of the community.
True, and often again that helps shift the additional view and the lens of dealing with disability and accessibility and inclusion from not just charity, not just human rights, but social and economic value proposition and imperative. And think of the opportunities that are out there. Anyone who's an entrepreneur and innovator, as you start to listen carefully and design solutions, now you have this huge net benefit to humanity if you're paying attention and start to synergize.
That's right. Well, I liked the fact that you used the word listen, because that's one thing that we talk to our ventures about a lot, is actually stop, that don't fall into the trap of having preconceptions about what somebody else's problem is. Make sure you're actually listening, and then you can discover actually what their problem actually is and whether you can help address that. And I think the statistic of 1.3 billion people is really powerful, because one of the challenges with marginalized communities is that there's not a spotlight on how big they are. They actually are a large economic sector that's a market. And so that actually is a huge opportunity to think about what can you do to design solutions to help that group, because it actually would be economically viable as a market.
True. Yeah, and then add aging boomers just rolling into that demographic, and it's it's an accelerating growing force for sure.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So one thing I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about, Rick, is so we spoke a little bit before about how your Man in Motion tour, you and many, many other athletes involved in the Paralympic movement, how that helped create more visibility around people with physical disabilities. So it moved from a time where often there wasn't a lot of visibility within community. Now people are included in schools, in the regular streams. You see people with full careers, with families. Talk a little bit about how regulators or how the government can play an activist role to help to transition communities towards some of these goals around accessibility.
Yeah, I think that's really critical. Think about the time when I left, just a couple of years earlier, before my Man in Motion tour. Canada brought home its constitution and its Charter of Rights and Freedom, and was probably the most progressive statement of the Canada that we want in the entire planet. And it actually specifically referenced people with disabilities as being included as equals. And those are lofty words. People fought very hard for that. A lot of champions and advocates. And people had no idea existed, and they were paving a way for me and so many others in our generation. But there's a difference between stating the words and then starting to see how that translates into real examples. And it's taken almost 30 years, well, more than 30 years for Canada just last year, to actually adopt our accessibility legislation that actually translated those words in that statement in our Constitution or Charter into a sense of, well, here's some more formal frameworks. Eventually it will be standards, policies, regulations. Up to that point, we've had human rights legislation where, issue by issue, you could actually challenge the courts, and of course that's a one-off issue and it's not systemic. And there's a UN rapporteur who came into Canada a while ago and assessed our progress. Great constitutional statement, great human rights backbone, but the systemic integration of our regulatory framework, legislation, policy, still had a huge way to go. Harmonization was a big issue. Canada's a confederation with jurisdictional complexity. When you look at federal, provincial, municipal, Indigenous, very, very, very important for Canada to build bridges of harmony, make sure our leaders don't actually just deal with their own rightful authority, that they have the responsibility to co-create and harmonize and make things more efficient and effective for Canada and connect us to the world. So these things are really critical. And we also, when we have to be careful though, when we put in these sort of social safety nets of the framework of what we consider to be minimum, acceptable mandated requirements, that we don't embed handicaps, because today's standards can become tomorrow's handicaps. And it's really the expectations of society as we quickly grow and we're accelerating exponentially, but also the way things are translating in terms of technology and moving to digital, and in our products and the things that we create completely transform again. And we have to keep that innovation cycle moving forward and incent that, and then keep reinforcing where those regulations and or those standards might be. Point in case, the building code, the BC building code built to a place where it's a very progressive standard at the time. It's been quite a while since it's been updated, and people's expectations. What's our symbol that we see of accessibility all throughout Canada and indeed around the world? It's a symbol of a stick man in a wheelchair. I mean, sorry, but does that represent the demographic we talk about? No, and there's a lot of other visible and not so visible disabilities. Perhaps we need a more progressive symbol of a human in motion, liberated by barriers being removed. And those are the sorts of things that then have to get translated into our building code, because there's a lot of other people with varying disabling conditions that, as we build out our infrastructure, the places and spaces that we live, work, learn, and play, then how are we going to accommodate and shift for that lens so we're making the best benefit for the most people? And that's a dynamic process. And it's that stretch and then build up to it, and then stretch again and build up to it. And also at one point, I think we just need to actually put to bed the fundamental question about, quote, cost, because in reality, the cost of confinement of existing disabling policies is completely, completely the driving force to deal with the relatively minor costs of accommodation and inclusion. And then on top of that, the accelerator is this incredible net economic and cultural benefit when we finally get to that place of infusion. And so I think that's just got to be completely taken off the equation. It's the cost of building the country we want for the value that we would expect.
That's right. That's right. And I think the way you've articulated that, where it's really the cost of losing that potential, that potential capital that we're not exploiting currently, unless we provide that support for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
And I think that you've done a really beautiful job of describing the fact that when we think about, when we're bringing in new regulations, new building codes, for example, we need to know that that's going to change in the future. Like you said, we need to have that flexibility, that incremental improvement, that this isn't the final solution. We need to be open to the fact that cultures are changing, views are changing. These things need to change over time.
So yeah,
Um,
we have also, to think about it here in Canada, the Canadian government, the federal government has put in our legislative framework, and there's only a few provinces that actually have legislation today, to match up, to that expectation that we put in back in the 80s. And so, I'm pleased to hear that British Columbia is planning to table legislation in the spring, and then continue to harmonize with the federal government that's still translating their legislation. So we'll at least have the beginnings of a really powerful statement that, that we actually can co-create a country rather than say, oh, that's my jurisdiction, you take off. We have a responsibility to, to kind of knit the country together and the world together as much as we have to build what's maybe local and unique for where we actually live.
That's right. And I think this concept of co-creation is so powerful because rather than all the effort having to be on top of the population that is trying to make that change, it should be a shared responsibility with the allies, and not just allies, but sponsors. So
Yeah.
all of that effort shouldn't be just on one group's shoulders. Everyone should be making that effort together.
It's true, yeah. And if we can actually normalize the issue where everybody is engaged, then powerful things happen. That's one of the reasons we at our foundation decided to really tackle the built environment, the places and spaces that people live, work, learn, and play, and take the knowledge from the disabled community and and translate it into an industry co-created set of standards, a learning curriculum for continuing education and accreditation, and then to measure the same thing and speak the same language. So now all of a sudden we have this emerging force where it's normal in industry. And once that happens, then people can also do something that you would expect would be powerful in any endeavor. They say that if you can't actually state what it is you're trying to achieve in the end game, then anything will do. And if you can't measure it, then how do you know where you are and how do you know when you're arriving? And so the idea of creating metrics and indexes that help empower us to understand where we are on the long ultra marathon of social change is critical. Otherwise, we can be so tactically busy. How do you know if we've had an impact?
Yes,
If we're arriving or if we're making progress?
exactly.
And this idea of actually being able to measure, rate, and create an index of where we are in the built environment, and compare it with the world is going to be a powerful force for change, because eventually people will be able to ask the question, how accessible is Vancouver? How accessible is UBC?
Yep.
And we'll be able to actually answer it.
Yep.
Wouldn't it be cool? Right now we can't.
Well, this is actually the perfect segue for us to now move from sort of focusing on the social aspect to more of the climate solutions. And the reason why is I was so pleased that you brought up this concept of metrics and indices, because we're in the process of doing this for the Climate Venture Studio right now. So we have, as a province and we have as a nation, goals for how we're going to meet, net zero by 2050, and reductions of emissions, and really caring about all aspects of the planet. But if we're not measuring it, then we're not going to know how we're going to get there. Right. And one of the really powerful statistics that's being circulated right now is that the estimate is that about 50% of the innovations we need to reach net zero, they haven't been invented yet. So we need to make sure that we're measuring things, we know where we're going, and we're also have our eyes open, because we need to create things that are new. So what I'd like to talk to you about now is your history of involvement actually within the conservation field, and specifically around fisheries. And maybe we'll start with sturgeon.
Yeah, well,
tell us a little story about sturgeon.
They're the mystery creatures that continue to keep poking their head up and saying hi to me throughout my life as I grew up here in British Columbia along the Fraser River. And I came to know these fish. You look at the Fraser River, it's the 10th largest river in the country. It's over 1,000 kilometers, and right in the headwaters of the Rocky Mountains, coming through the Caribou and all the way down into the Fraser Valley here. It's basically the lifeblood, a working river. Simon Fraser came down the Fraser River when he and his voyageurs explored, and they were sustained over a long winter, by the Stolo with gifts of sturgeon meat. And that tragically started a big commercial fishery. And really millions of pounds a year of these fish were harvested, like clear cutting an ecosystem of prehistoric creatures were over 150 years of age, and then all of a sudden these fish were in trouble. And ultimately, what happened one day was that there was a huge kind of die off of big mature broodstock in the early 90s, and I decided to get a group of people together and ask a question: do we know what's happening with the fish? And the answer was everybody had a completely different perspective. All this large, water body, it's silty, you never see the fish. And so the question was, why don't we bring together everybody who cares about the fish, science, and the technical folks, and put a design framework in place, mobilize every ounce of energy, and actually get a handle on the population assessment. And within 10 years, we were able to really get a great perspective on where the fish were, understand with that population model, with thousands and thousands of impacts, to be able to actually then recognize that the fish actually they really are in trouble, and it really is interesting. If you look inside the population with enough data, you realize that the sport fishermen who are catching and releasing the fish, or the indigenous fishers who are fishing salmon and connect with the fish accidentally by bycatch, they will say that there's never been more big fish in the Fraser River. What's the problem? And the reality is that's true, but they're right at the apex. And then there's a whole cohort of teenagers that are actually, they've crossed that threshold and they're declining. And then there's juveniles that are declining. And so they only see one part of that population. But if you look at the whole, it makes you realize why, if we've got a large broodstock, that we don't have recruitment. And there are forces at play, and the interconnection, the story that sturgeon tell, they're the apex of this rich ecosystem that's been stressed, and they are directly connected to the quality of the habitat, the water, the food supply. They're so connected with salmon and ooligans and lamprey eels and everything that's in this river. And if those are out of balance, then sturgeon, even if you've got a healthy broodstock, can be not able to reproduce. And so it forces us to know where the issues are, and then we can marshal a whole range of other challenging questions and advocates and research to be able to go in and find cause and effect. And truly, I believe that over the next 10 years, we can turn these fish around and bring them into the light with that dynamic story, and ask people to really be involved and do something to ensure that they're around for generations and centuries to come.
Yeah, I just think that the story of the sturgeon is so compelling, as you said, because it's really is a symbol for BC and symbol for the Fraser River, and that interconnection between people and between the habitat, and just the story of the co-creation of the strategy of bringing so many different groups together: the recreational fishermen, the Aboriginal community, DFO and other groups, and the scientists, to try to see how could you solve this problem, what kind of data could you collect, what kind of tools could you use, is really, really powerful.
And the story of the sturgeon, you need a body that's impartial, that can speak for the fish, so that government can actually then make good policy decisions. They can make decisions, that people can talk about, whether fisheries or economic or various other development issues. And that really it's empowering. But secondly, the story of the fish connects you to the interconnection of the environment and the ecosystem. You can look at, for instance, the challenges that happen when there's a bycatch. If there's an old style of fishing that essentially goes after, say, salmon, and you're accidentally targeting other species, whether they're steelhead or sturgeon, or even endangered salmon species, in a mixed stock environment, then what it does, and what I'm seeing is it's starting to inspire the indigenous community, as an example, to really go back to some traditional technologies, or introduce new technologies to create more sustainable capture mechanisms for targeted salmon, and then release all unintended species unharmed, and that really takes the pressure off these challenges. And at the end of the day, wouldn't that be wonderful for all of us to keep innovating new ways to identify and to see fish being captured and utilized for food, cultural, ceremonial, recreational, and commercial fishing, as it has been for centuries before, but in a healthy and sustainable way, and ultimately where sturgeon get to thrive through that.
Yes.
The powerful vision, and ultimately, I think that can be done, but we have to do it together. It's not about pointing fingers, creating silos of idealistic camps. It's about looking at problems, identifying solutions, and incenting that transformation to be able to get there. And using new technologies, like wouldn't it be great to be able to create a digital map of all the data sets that we have today, the 100 years of research, including Indigenous historic knowledge of fisheries on the Fraser River, and then create a digital twin and have it be accessible and open source for anyone who wants to be able to ask questions and make assumptions, and then start to introduce new solutions and maybe even rebuild and systematically reclaim some of the habitat that's been lost over the last century.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really, really powerful. One of the things that's quite interesting about this concept of having targeted harvesting is that historically we didn't realize it was a problem. You just took what you wanted and you just disposed of the rest, and the bycatch, 90% of it dies. So now this concept of me going back to historical information or historical pursuits that are more targeted is very helpful.
Yeah, and of course, in the old days, it was everything was so abundant. There was no limit. And nowadays, there was limits to everything that we do as humans on this planet, and we have to be responsible to reframe, recalibrate, and that extends not just in the Fraser River, but into the ocean, and of course the connectedness of the ocean, to all species, of which salmon are the iconic kind of lifeblood of British Columbia in many ways, and they're so connected to sturgeon. Without salmon, sturgeon are completely lost, and they won't survive or thrive, and so we have to take a broader view and ultimately extend ourselves, and the ability to gather metrics about measuring our ecosystem and informing policymakers and stakeholders of where those balances are. That's got to happen. We have the technology today to be able to do it, and places like UBC and others are so poised to be able to contribute to that opportunity.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. So I think we'll end this section now with just sort of one last question, which is why are we not making progress fast enough in terms of both caring for the planet, but also intersecting with caring for an inclusive society. So if you could sort of have a view for the perfect future that you'd want to see, how could we get there?
I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, if this is such an important thing to people everywhere on the planet, why is it that we're not making progress? I think it's because we've reduced everything to its infinite part, that we've which is really it's the human nature and it's our curiosity, but we often forget to put the proportionate energy into the interconnectedness of how it all comes together. And it comes together, I believe, because humans have such a powerful influence on our planet, on ourselves, and ultimately on the way in which we think. If we don't come together, if we don't bring it together, as a whole, like people who care about fish, or who care about clean air or clean land, or or animals, or we all care about the same things. And if we also recognize that people who care about healthy people also we care about the same things, and we care about an inclusive society. We care about the same things. And I think we have to stop asking people to choose, and we have to start coming together about the world that we see, a healthy and inclusive world, and find ways for people to engage, and then start to form movement-based communities that are bigger than the sum of our parts, that then translate into voting and into commerce and into our expectations of our leaders. And ultimately it becomes normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's expected, and there's consequences for it not to translate. And so I was talking to David Suzuki about this very dilemma, and asked the question, like, how can people who care about an inclusive society and healthy people, work together with people who care about a healthy planet? It's quite simple in the concept, and we've got to be able to get to that level while such great work is being done in the trenches in so many of these micro, very important areas, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's just a beautiful message, that really it's around shared values and that interconnection. And I think that's a beautiful message for people to take home for them, with this idea of this a movement-based commitment.
I
And
think coming out of COVID, I really do believe that more than ever, this has forced all of us to to rethink about the limits of human growth, our impact on the environment and the climate, our health, and those barriers to inclusivity that have to be broken down. So I hear it coming through so much for the last year, and now we have to be able to figure out how to translate that into more accelerated breakthrough opportunities, and everybody hopefully will get a chance to win.
thank you so much, Rick.
Yeah,
I know that we have a large number of questions from people that have some beautiful questions they put in the chat, and I'm going to pass it over to Michelle, who's going to be coordinating all the questions. So go ahead, Michelle.
and then all the tough ones can go to you.
Yeah. There's some meaty questions in the chat, I'll tell you that much, which is super exciting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself to ask your question directly to Rick or Shannon. There were a few people with multiple questions, so for fairness, I'm going to try to get through all sort of uniques first, and then we'll, if we've got time, we'll circle back with people that had more than one question. But love that people were so inspired through this discussion to put some great comments in there. So Stanley Lee, we are going to start with you. If you are able to unmute yourself and ask your first question.
All right, thanks for making the time. Just gonna keep it short. Rick mentioned about the bridges to inclusivity, and I'm just wondering, what are the conditions involved, like in terms of having the incentives for other people to do that? Because I don't think there is anything in the world. I don't think there is such a thing as no strings attached, like at least in this world. So.
Yeah, great question. Well, I think I'd like to ask almost the reverse of that, which is what are the conditions that from our perspective are not negotiable? When we think of building an inclusive society, I think clearly it's the sense of trust, of respect, dignity, accessibility. To be able to be understood, and ultimately, if we can actually start with that framework, then I think we can actually start building more and more of those bridges, because I think there's still a lot of really deep-seated fear out there. It's deep-rooted based on like probably generations and generations of history, and I know it's not an easy thing to translate into, and so. My sense is let's start talking about the things that are not negotiable, and then create a framework, and then power up from there.
Oh, Michelle, you're on mute.
I'm on mute again. There we go. Stanley, thank you so much for your question. So now we're going to move over to Noah. If you'd like to unmute yourself, which can be a bit of an exercise, I know, and ask your question.
Hi, Rick. This was actually Doug's question in our group, but I can read it out for us. And so the question was, when it comes to driving social good and stewardship, what is the precursor among government policy, shareholder preferences, and consumer drive, or is it all three?
Yeah, I think you have to start with, again, from the perspective of the country and the society that you want. There's got to be a minimum framework of accountability and expectation to get there. a shared responsibility and expectation. But then I think we have to go beyond that. I really do. I think if we limit ourselves to that, then we stifle innovation, creativity, and synergy, and then we start becoming compliance police. And I really would feel sad if that bubble was so big, simply because we stopped. And there's been lessons in previous countries who have tried that approach. In the States, as an interesting example with the Americans with Disabilities Act, they've really done some great work, but they really put in the regulatory framework there with their legislation to mandate accessibility for people with disabilities with some big loophole exemptions, and then they pushed it hard, and a lot of things happened from that. A lot of litigious engagement, a lot of costs, and challenge and conflict, but a lot happened over the last couple of decades. But a lot of people started thinking that they were there, and there was no, they really missed that sort of boomer demographic and the broader frame, and a lot of the economic and even now, the digital revolution. So there's a lot of really important things to really catch up on now. And in Canada, while we've been latent in a lot of our regulatory framework, I think we can take advantage of both. We've relied on a lot of goodwill and collaboration, and but we can actually do both. Yeah, and I think that's super critical. But it's also important for consumers to start to speak with their choices, and if you have visibility on who's meeting your values, then there's a huge wallet behind those choices. Why would you go to businesses that aren't accessible and inclusive if that's what you care about?
Awesome. Thank you so much for your question, Noah. Thanks for that that response there, Rick. So moving right along, Bill, I'm not sure if there's multiple Bills on the call here, but Bill Schmiegel, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, but if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question to Rick or Shannon.
Thanks, Michelle. My question kind of builds off of the questions by Stanley and Noah. And it's for both Shannon and Rick. We talked a lot about the challenge in getting large groups of people to collectively buy in the pursuit of environmental and social solutions, and the need for incentives to encourage both society and industry to kind of pursue these solutions while understanding the needs of all of the stakeholders that are involved. So what I was wondering if you guys could speak to just your thoughts on how do you encourage these large groups of people to pursue environmental and social solutions?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first part is the conversation about where your values are, and to make people aware of how important these issues are to your values, so that they rise to the level of one of those non-negotiable, important, fundamental, foundation-based values. Secondly, is to create that sense of we're starting to see that now in a lot of our regulatory frameworks, where we're setting climate action goals, carbon neutral, goals, and we're driving innovation. So we're starting to get consumers purchasing things that are relevant to that if they know the difference. But I think incentives are also important as well. If you're looking for a transformation, I think it's really important to try to work with the industry and work with citizens to be able to make some of those transformations, because in the long run it might make economic sense, but in the short term there's a cost and a challenge. And it's been done before in a lot of sectors down in the States. There's been interesting tax incentives for people who are moving to green, and people who are focusing on there's also been penalties for people who are engaged in activities that are creating environmental damage, and that's also gone to help support, and so I think you can actually drive those kinds of solutions in that balance the issue between the mandate, the incentive, and then the economy and opportunity. So and it's the same issue on accessibility as an example. If you've got old infrastructures built in the 60s without this viewpoint in mind, are you going to demand that a shop owner, small business owner, spends hundreds of thousands of dollars to make their place accessible when they have just a small number of people in there and they can't afford it? Or are you going to maybe give them some tax credits over a 5-year period so they can access the capital, and have it be a modest investment which they can afford, and everybody wins from that. So at some point you have to give a little bit, and I think some of our tax approaches in Canada have to transform as well, because the world is changing, and it's not, you can't expect government to do everything, but if you're going to expect our values to be delivered, there's got to be these incentives and these opportunities and challenges.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just build on Rick's mention of shared values. So just dealing with the conservation issue or an environmental issue, I had some experience back in the 80s in which there were groups that were in opposition to one another, and it was around the during the War of the Woods. It was around the issue around the forestry industry and pollution that was going from the pulp mills into the Strait of Georgia. And so you had people that were on the mill side, industrialists and unionists, who thought that they were in opposition to the fishermen and the environmentalists. But when they came, both groups came to work with me, and I was doing work to try to demonstrate or try to understand what was the impact of the pollution on the animals actually living at the beach. And people came to actually see, oh, there's no actual intertidal fish living in this spot. But if we go further away, now we start to see blennies and gunnels and starfish try to start to arise. And when people started to come together, they realized that they actually had similar concerns and similar values. So people that worked in the mill who were concerned about the fact that the mortality for pulp mill workers was 4 times higher than the general population if you worked in the bleaching mill from cancer, that the health and safety issues were actually similar values to fishermen being worried about the depletion of stocks because of fish die-offs and the environmentalists. So when you fundamentally get down to those shared values, then you realize that you might not be an adversary and you can start working together.
True, exactly. If you look at the idea of, for instance, our values on our ecosystem, a clean, healthy, and sustainable ecosystem, and ultimately you set those values, and then you look at, well, as an example, what's current and often on the news is the issues about fish farms, and in our West Coast fish farm approach, there's an economy that's built there, but at the end of the day, if that technology and that approach doesn't match our values, if there's collateral damage to wild salmon and the ecosystem, then is it about the fish farming is bad, aquaculture is bad, or is it that we work to make that transformation and that jobs aren't lost, they're actually gained because we create closed pen systems, we move them perhaps onto land, into better production capabilities. We have the world's largest supply of fresh water, bordered by 3 oceans, large landmass, and all of a sudden it's a global opportunity for Canada in aquaculture. It's not about one or the other. It's about working in creating a solution that makes sense for our values, and then also not driving it and saying, well, industry, you've just got to deal with that. That's your problem. It's our collective problem. How do we help and sit down with industry, and how does industry be a leader in that transformation, not make them the bad guy? And we've created the situation as a whole, and we can form and work our way out and get to where we need to go. But that's part of that synergy that you're talking about. Same would be for unsustainable harvest technologies. If that's what we're doing, whether it be in the Fraser River or in the ocean, we know we've seen all over the world, wild stocks are being threatened everywhere. Well, why, if that's our values here in British Columbia, then how are we going to accept that to continue? But it's not the fishermen who are the problem. It's our collective view and then our plan to make that transformation and to support that process so that ultimately, it's a win-win for everybody. I mean, we have to do that. Otherwise, our values are not being respected, and we're simply capitulating and saying, oh, well, we just can't deal with that. Well, there's very few industries I know in the world that haven't been forced under massive transformation, whether it's you like it or not. Others have literally disappeared because of that disruption, but we just have to keep challenging and working and making that happen.
And speaking of challenges, for everyone that's on the line, Innovate BC announced last week that they're having an industry challenge for aquaculture. And that RFP just went out in the last week. So please look on their website.
That's exactly what you love to see, right? Yeah, fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, Bill, you definitely got a really great discussion point happening there. So I'm going to move on now to Paul Burkello. Hopefully I've pronounced your last name correctly. I know you had a couple of questions, so feel free to choose one of them and ask away.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And thank you, Rick, for the presentation. It's been fantastic to learn more about your work. I wanted to ask from the perspective of community builders, and specifically, people in the entrepreneurship space, like incubators, accelerators, like E at UBC and Climate Venture Studio. That's the area that I've worked in the past. I'm curious, how do you, or do you have any tips that you could share for how to be more inclusive towards people with disabilities in a way that doesn't make them singled out? Because I have to imagine if you live as somebody with a disability, it gets tiresome to be defined by that all the time. And you probably don't necessarily want people reaching out just on that basis. But if you want to build a community that's more inclusive, how do you do that in a way that welcomes people in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the first thing is that it's the mindset of being inclusive right before you start. And it's having a 360 view right from the way in which you approach the idea and the initiative that you're working on. The first thing should be, number one, is to make sure I'm not accidentally creating a new barrier. And especially if you're dealing with the digital world, the digital world has this incredible opportunity to liberate. But if we're not conscious, we could be creating some cool gadget that then has to get my friend, Dr. Gary Birch, who's been trying to back-end engineer and adapt the digital world for people with disabilities for decades now. And so you make it normal. So, right away from the beginning, how is this going to actually affect and liberate people with disabilities? And actually, maybe that thinking creates new insights to even a better product. Secondly is when I'm actually bringing my team together, whether it's at the board level or staff or volunteers, is being inclusive, and that's having at least an articulated policy, depending on how big or formal you are, but making sure that you're clear on that. And secondly, is when you actually go to recruit, is actually make sure that you're working and interfacing where it's not just about putting a posting that says you're inclusive and then sending it out and expecting it to get there. There's still big gaps between the intention and actually the reality. How do we get to that large 1 in 5 population number, to get potential employees or collaborators, and recognizing still that coming through the university system, there's still barriers. There's barriers, in universities that are, way further down the road than when I was there in the 70s, but there's still barriers. There's great organizations like the Accessibility Center at UBC, great interface to students, to faculty, to staff. And then when you move past the issue of the barriers, you can actually recognize that the word can get out. And then as bringing people in is look for some level of awareness about it's not really about people. If you want to normalize it, it's about understanding talent, right? And it's really matching strength, to need, and it's reducing the barriers to to function and having a healthy dialogue, an open and healthy dialogue. It's not about bringing your card out and saying, "Here's the specific disability I have. What does that matter?" My friend was a double amputee, and he was working, on a painting crew, and his manager, and boss, decided to put him on the lower part of the building, and he scooted around the bottom of the house, and he painted the lower side. The other guys painted the upper side, and essentially he had less, WCB claims from the team, and they did a hell of a job. And so the guy was smart enough to ask the question. And if you find the barriers, don't you want to just work around that? And it's easy in a conversation. You'd be surprised at how easy the accommodation side is once you know what the problem is and how you can help. And at the end of the day, it's just building that sense of comfort that people are informed. It's often overwhelming at first. You think, oh, it's a big. There's resources out there to draw from, and gain a little extra support to give yourself that comfort level. And at the end of the day, just be authentic. If you really want to get on top of it, then hold yourself accountable with some metrics. You know, diversity on the boardroom. Everybody talks about women or or indigenous or ethnic. But gosh, they're struggling for it's double digits. But people with disabilities have been researched out to be about 0.4%. So it starts at the top, and are the metrics there, and then is everybody held accountable? And if you go check, your dashboard control, diversity, inclusion, accessibility dashboard, you just check, and it's part of your normal process. And then you're not inadvertently creating barriers, and you're optimizing yourself to full productivity of the product, full quality of diverse talent. And then when you go out and testing, you're also getting people from the real world to test to see if your product works too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. We've got time for a couple more questions. And I wanted to call on Alex. You had a great question around bias. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask that question to Rick.
Hi, Rick. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your worldviews. I've really enjoyed this event so far. And I'm sorry if this question comes out as a mouthful. I'm going to try and summarize it as much as possible. But you talked about how a lot of your resilience came from experience. So my question and comment kind of lies in having to firsthand experience different countries' social and environmental welfare in order to truly know the potential solution to the problem at hand. So how do we create a set of metrics that is cohesively used across the globe without the bias of economic growth that is unequally represented amongst different populations? Because currently we measure country's social welfare through things like GDP per capita and Human Development Index and life expectancy. But I feel like we need to get rid of this bias and come together as a global community to create a set of metrics that properly displays a country's social and environmental welfare, but also results in answers to these climate problems in these areas. Because climate change doesn't have one size fits all solution, and each region feels different pressures from that problem, and sometimes the terrain or their capital funding doesn't have the solution that they need.
Yeah, that's great. That's a big framework, and but at the end, it comes down to the fact that it's complicated for sure. You have such a diversity of perspectives, and whether you're living here in Canada out on the West Coast versus the East Coast versus China versus Africa versus India. I mean, everybody's looking at it differently. But at the end of the day, too, you can take some basic things, like, for instance, you can be like hardcore and think that everything's measured by, let's say, whether a person, let's just make it simple, person in a wheelchair can get in and out of a building to go to school, and well, that's an interesting metric. But at the end of the day, you might be able to ask yourself a different question. Can every person, including a person in a wheelchair, get to school? And and so at the end of the day, that you have a chance to be able to then look at that outcome more fundamentally, that would apply everywhere. There's just different approaches to get there, and sometimes the technology solution isn't possible, and you end up with a scenario where you have to actually rely on your family members or your community to literally physically get that person into the classroom to go to school, and they get there. It's not the ideal way. It's not the perfect solution, but in dealing with developed and developing world, you can reconcile framework and look at outcome. And I think those basic metrics can give you a sense of understanding where we are, and then it allows you latitude for individual perspective as to what you're really dealing with, so that you're not putting those expectations of, say, a different social economic group on some part of the world that's not realistic or appropriate.
Thanks so much, Rick. So we've got time for probably one more question just before we wrap up. And so I wanted to call on Tammy, if you are still on the call and want to unmute yourself and ask your question, if it hasn't been answered already.
Michelle, it looks like Tammy has left if you want to move to another question.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Allison. John Emery, you had a question if you'd like to ask that.
I actually think my question was a little off base. It had more to do with the inequities of how climate change affects marginalized populations and how to ensure that those populations are not just included in discussing the options, but to look at how to address the potential power inequity that sort of overarches a table where that discussion may be taking place, because and I guess this also applies to inclusivity. How can you go to a person and ask them a question if they don't understand all the context that it's presented in? And I've been in lots of situations where, we do ask people to answer questions that they're not that familiar with. And I suppose if we have a lot of folks with physical challenges in the room, they'll be experienced with it and be able to provide insight. But perhaps they wouldn't be as familiar with some of the options for solutions if they, as some of the, for example, engineering students might be. So I guess the question is, how do we balance the table so everybody can be involved in a meaningful way?
Yeah, that's a great point. Really, really good question and good concern. And at the end of the day, I guess it's starting with the conversation. Making sure that people actually get included and try to bring that level playing field. Knowledge is important. One of the most important things that I've learned, whether it's been just dealing with a disability itself, like I had absolutely zero knowledge to even make a choice, and I had this perspective that was completely a handicapping perspective, and until I had knowledge, I couldn't even begin to answer the question. So it's informing, connecting, and then helping people deal with a transformation, because at the end of the day, we have to be able to level the playing field, and knowledge is critical. If people don't even have a clue that there's a problem, and a limit to to development and our imprint, then they wouldn't even understand where to answer it, no matter where they're going from. And if you don't even see the connection between your habits in a day-to-day, even living here in BC, and how it's affecting climate change, then where do you begin? We've got to level the playing field and help people shift their perspective, no matter where they come from. At the end of the day, we're all connected, right? And we can't work in isolation anymore. The planet is too small.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rick. Wow. Amazing questions. I have like a whole list of them here, but unfortunately we are running out of time. But we wanted to give everyone an opportunity to kind of zoom back out into breakout groups and share some of your key takeaways. I think there's an opportunity here to kind of think about some of our own calls to action, if you will. And I think there was such interesting points that both Rick and Shannon made, that this would be a great opportunity. Maybe think about, sort of what are some of the most salient points, and how can we, act on that. So I'm going to ask my colleague Shirley to beam people out for, I think we're going to chat for another 10-ish minutes or so. And then we're going to come back in for a quick wrap up and some final announcements. So thanks again. Okay, MJ, I think that everyone has popped into a breakout room except for the team here. So we can probably, although do love the groovy tunes. Well, seriously, that was amazing. People were like writing essays in the chat. I'm like, I can't keep up. It was really good. Yeah, Shirley, 10 minutes, and I think we can bring everybody back just for a quick wrap up.
Looks like there's one person in the waiting room.
Yeah, we pop them there. If they don't go to the breakout
they
room,
have to. Okay.
they get tossed into the waiting room.
Okay, got it.
MJ, is the live transcript still recording right now as we're in here?
Yeah, I just disabled it.
So Allison, so you're going to be the one moderating the next discussion, or unmuting people's hands?
There's no discussion. It's just the wrap up.
We
Okay.
just need a few minutes when we had that wiggle room for any like final takeaways.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Is that okay?
Now people will probably be brought in. We're thinking about 5:49. Shirley, bringing people back, or 5:50 for 10-minute conclusions and wrap-ups. Shirley, to confirm.
Yeah, I sent them at 5:39, so it'll be 5:49.
Okay,
Yeah.
Perfect.
You see that second bullet point, Michelle?
I'm looking at that right
Are your key
now.
takeaways? Please raise your hand. Blah blah blah.
Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. I did not see that part. That would be you.
Yeah. No, I'm going to say that. But it says Allison is going to unmute raised hands. So,
Allison, are you unmuting raised hands?
Yeah. Did we still want to do that with the time? Like give a few people if they wanted takeaways, or did we want to just scratch that part?
No, I think we can give if we could do maybe one or two takeaways, just because I think the conversation is so robust that one takeaway could take us down a rabbit hole. But anyways, let's try to get a couple because I would like to obviously make sure we've got time for the thank yous, and Rick's team had some announcements that they wanted shared, and we've got a couple of announcements as well.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Then if we ask them to raise their hands or put it in the chat, and if you just verbalize their name, I can go in there and unmute them.
I will also keep an eye on the chat.
Thank you.
Some really great questions.
I'm going to just duck out for a second, but when Rick comes back, I was going to invite him to just stay on the line when we've finished, just for 2 or 3 minutes, just so we have a chance to really thank everyone in the team. It's so abrupt when you finish these webinars. It's nice to actually sort of have like a private thank you right at the very end.
Yeah, absolutely.
Note, we're going to skip the APN 2021 announcement. So Shannon, what that means for you is just striking it from the script. MJ, what it means for you is just removing the slide.
Okay, just to confirm, the whole slide is to be removed. Okay, so we'll just do our own community announcements.
No, they have. Oh, so.
Just received a note to just take it out.
Okay. Never mind. What do I know?
Shannon, if we're good, are you able to skip over that? Is Shannon still there? I'll just go to the script.
So even their upcoming event applicable to our audience, hosted by the Brick Hansen Foundation, they don't want that?
The APN 2021.
Oh, I see. Got it. Okay. We can include that in the follow-up email.
I'll confirm with them.
Okay.
See if that's still there. So Feb Are you in the, oh, here it is. I have so many Feb 23rd docs.
I just moved the slide up in the deck in case we need it, but it's out of the narrative now. So
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Dun, 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 dun.
So I've given them a 30-second warning. They should
Okay.
be coming back pretty soon.
So Shannon, you're all good with your next steps?
Yes, yes. How do I know when I start?
Alice.
I can shoot you a text when I see everyone is back.
And I just sent you a note, Shannon.
Oh, you sent me a note.
Oh, via Slack.
Oh,
Zoom DM.
okay.
So it's all-
Oh, okay. Oh, we're taking it out. Okay. Okay.
Everyone's gonna show up in 5 seconds.
All righty. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for coming back for a second time. So I hope you all had a rich discussion in the breakout rooms. So right now, I'd like to invite people to share their key takeaway from the main discussion that you had, or even if there was a different point of view that might have come up in your breakout room. So you can either raise your Zoom hand or you can just pose that in the chat. Anyone being brave?
They're all in awe. Oh, Paul, I see.
Yes. Go ahead, Paul.
All right. I'll just say, Mr. Hansen, you have absolutely inspired so many people around the world to achieve their personal bests. And I just think, that's the kind of leadership we need to address our current, health crisis, economic crisis, crisis of lack of diversity, and of course, our climate crisis. So it's just been really inspiring to hear not just what you've done, but how you've moved people to achieve so much more.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. And, I feel privileged to be on a journey, and so many people have impacted me, and, right back to the roots at UBC. And so it's a privilege to be able to chat to you guys. Thank you.
We actually have one takeaway here that's popped into the chat. I don't know, Shannon, if you can see that, if you wanted to draw that out, but, and hopefully I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Miro had posted a quick comment.
So his key takeaway was around bringing an accessibility lens into the conception and the implementation of technology, and not after it's made. So I think that that's critically important. We've had these discussions about trying to think about these things ahead of time before you've already selected your training data set and your algorithms, which are flawed and have prejudice that are built into them. And so having these discussions when you're starting to think about building your community, I think are really powerful. And Rick, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, well, of course, I like that, because, even, I hope Elon Musk is listening, because, he can actually, make sure that his SpaceX is fully accessible. Because, one of my dreams is that, someone with a spinal cord injury is going to, go into space, leave the wheelchair behind, and be in a weightless environment, inclusive, and circumnavigate the world multiple times in a day, demonstrating, that space and its future is for everyone. And why not, right? Why not?
That's a wonderful dream. We have one more raised hand from Dipti. Allison, if you can unmute Dipti. Go ahead, Dipti.
Yeah. Hi, Rick. I'm so glad I joined this call. I'm going to tell my children about you, and we're going to discuss your story and how I'm sure it'll inspire them as well. I just wanted to say that I think we all need to think of what privilege means to us, and how our biases are linked to that, and then think about inclusivity. And this will help us in designing solutions, and also in bringing everybody together. Because many times our privileges and our biases are very much linked. And I realized about my privileges only recently. So I think we should question that every time we start to think how somebody is different from us, or why is somebody doing something.
Great point, Dipti. Yeah, really fantastic insight. And at the end of the day, we're all on this journey together. And if we're listening, synergizing, and trying to help each other along the way, I think the solutions will become pretty clear. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that was a really beautiful message, Dipti. And I think that the theme is around having empathy. And if we have empathy for other people and we have shared values, then we can build a strong society. And Walter, let's unmute you. You have a comment as well.
Hi, Rick. I was one of the engineering students that worked with you in the late 70s on a wheelchair. And I appreciate you pushing us to make it go faster. Many of those lessons I've passed on to my students.
Thanks, Walter. I appreciate you being there, man. It was really, just a tremendous collaboration. And again, I'm so grateful. And it helped change my life. Who would have known that journey ultimately would lead me on my Man in Motion tour? And if I hadn't been able to break through in sport at that level, the insights and the global perspective might not have forged that dream. And it would have been maybe a completely different outcome. So thanks for having shares in the journey.
Oh, and you changed my life a lot. Believe me, some of the tricks and techniques we learned get applied every day in my career. So, and it's hopefully passed on. So, maybe we're making the world a better place, huh?
Well, thanks, Walter. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you're passing it on to your students. That's fantastic.
Well, I'm trying to pass it on to my son, but he's not listening. So we'll see.
Oh, they're listening. Just it's not obvious right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Walter. It was so lovely to have that full circle I'll come back again. And that's a really nice place, I think, for us to end. This has just been a really lovely afternoon and evening with Rick. And I just really wanted to make a big thank you to you, Rick, and your team at the Rick Hansen Foundation, who've been working with us for the last few weeks. Oh, look at that. There's a beautiful sturgeon.
Without the star of the show, my beloved symbol of sturgeon, again, incredible survivors, and they just need half a chance. And so I want to thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. Love what you're doing. You're really having a huge contribution, not just to UBC, but through your work. And I'm very proud of what you're doing. I want to thank your team and obviously my team for what it took to be able to make this digital connection. And here we are virtually still reaching out. And it's a real privilege. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity. And we really just think that the intersection of the social good and the environmental welfare is just such an important topic for us to be discussing, as innovators and entrepreneurs, and just to help us to build, a better future. And having these concepts around empathy and diversity are ways that we can be open to these other ideas and not be fixed in the way we're doing things. So I want to pass it back to Michelle, and she's got some exciting updates that are coming over to the community just as we're wrapping up. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon and Rick and Rick's team. Again, it's just been an amazing experience working with the team and having you join us today. I know we're basically kind of at almost the hour here, and Allison wants to share a quick poll. So you can see there's a couple of community updates here on the slide. The one I will call attention to for anyone that's joined us today, if you are not part of an EAUBC venture building program, applications are open until this Thursday, so 2 more days till February 25th. If you want to apply to core or lab to launch, there's more information on our website. And of course, you could reach out to any of the EAUBC folks, and we're happy to provide some more information to you. And this, of course, includes our Climate Venture Studio and Social Venture Studio stream as well. So whether you're on core or lab to launch, there's the opportunity to kind of dive deeper into these industry verticals there, which Shannon and her co-lead Paul run the Climate Venture Studio and the Social Venture Studio. And then I also wanted to share really quickly, we have an awesome campaign that is coming up for International Women's Day. We have a partnership with Flick, who's actually a phase 3 venture with us here at UBC. And they've launched a really phenomenal mentor apprentice matching platform. So for IWD, we actually have a week-long campaign, and I just wanted to draw your attention to on March 12th. We'll be having a panel from noon to 1:30. You can see our list of extremely powerful speakers that are going to be joining us for the event. So really hoping that we'll see your lovely faces again. And so that information will also be included in the email that Allison sends out tomorrow, just as a wrap up for the event. Your feedback is incredibly important. We're only as good as our last game. So we need to make sure that our community helps keep us in check. So it's really great to get some feedback, and that way we can continue to improve. So I'm going to leave it to Allison to share a couple of quick poll questions. They're right there. You don't even have to leave your screen. Thank you for the feedback. And thanks everyone so much for joining us. This has been an absolutely epic event and conversation. So really feeling very, very, very lucky that we had the opportunity to do this. Thank you.